Hello, everybody. Welcome. This is part 4 of this conversation. We are having Yebra Lopez, Dr. Carlos Yebra Lopez, and myself, Dr. Usman Chohan, about critical polyglot studies. It's a tome that we are very passionate about. We have discussed the aspects of it. We have talked about how there is a community, there is an industry, and there is a matrix surrounding polyglot phenomena, polyglossia. Then we have talked about what critical polyglot studies is in relation to that in an overarching sense. And now our conversation is about the specific interventions. We're going far more tactical after having our strategic conversation about CPS. So I'm going to open to Carlos with this concept of programmatic points that we have in this book about how to deal with the problems that we have in polyglossia. So what are the programmatic points?
Yeah, so there are a number of initiatives we identify and we categorize them by type, from more innocuous to more revolutionizing, right? So there are 6 types of programmatic points that we present, and we have 1 programmatic point per sector of the polyglot industry. Since there are 4 sectors in the polyglot industry, that makes 24 programmatic points, right? So the categories are 6. The first one are remedial initiatives. This means that you fix a certain aspect, but you leave everything else as it is. An example of this would be, for instance, Richard Simcoe's publication of a new code of conduct after the Polyglot Conference 2022. The aim was not to abolish the Polyglot Conference, but it was to fix a problem that had been detected, i.e. discrimination based on a number of aspects, whether those are gender or racial, etc., and say, listen, this will be allowed, this will not be allowed, right? So there's a new code of conduct to make participants more aware. And that's a commendable initiative, but it falls into the remedial category. Then we have subversive initiatives. Subversive initiatives have a little bit more pop to it, right? They are more forceful. And an example will be the publication of the annual Journal of Glottopolitics by a research group at CUNY, which is City University of New York. And this journal is subversive because it does not follow the typical path of academic journals. It does not publish abstracts in English. It is not indexed. It does not follow the metrics of the neoliberal model of academia. As an example of a subversive practice. Then we have disruptive ones, which are a bit more forceful than subversive. Think, for instance, in the Polyglot Gathering 2024, everybody had a badge, and in that badge, they should mention the languages they speak. And on top of all the languages, there was a category called native language. And you had to specify your quote-unquote native language. There is only one problem with that. There are no native languages. So by leaving that row blank, I baited other participants into asking me, hey, what do you, how come you don't have any native language? Like, how is that possible? Okay, because native speakerism, my friend, is a linguistic ideology. And this is what it is about, and this is why it's empirically wrong and ideologically pernicious. So that practice of leaving the native speakers, the native language row blank, was a disruptive practice because it disrupted the normal rhythm of assuming native languages as self-evident realities. So we've seen remedial, subversive, disruptive. The next one is paradigm shifting. This book, my friend, is paradigm shifting. It takes a paradigm, i.e. polyglot studies, and it shifts in another direction, critical polyglot studies. Another example will be HYPIA's WhatsApp group. It allows polyglots and hyperpolyglots to communicate while removing money from the equation. So that's a paradigm shifting vis-a-vis the polyglot industry, right? It changes the way things operate within the regular paradigm. Then we have abolitionist practices. They are more forceful than paradigm shifting because they abolish or remove something that had been done in a certain way for a long time. For instance, when OpenAI released ChatGPT as a large language model, that allowed people to practice languages without meeting people in real life or even the internet, but just speaking to chatbots. That's abolitionist because it torpedoes the fundamental functioning of polyglot meetings, as in weekly meetings in Mundolingo, for instance. and also language learning applications as the by default means by which to quote unquote learn a quote unquote language. And finally, we have revolutionizing, which might be too dangerous to speak about in YouTube. So I'll ask the audience to read that part of the chapter in a
Good
quiet
call.
and safe place.
Good call. But to summarize this now, there are four big sectors or corners of a diamond, our polyglot diamond that we introduced early in the book. And what we did is for those four corners, we have 6 degrees of improvement. And
Yes.
they're from somewhat innocuous to absolutely revolutionary. So 6 multiplied by the four corners gives you 24. And this is an example of analytical rigor because we went around systematically. What were the four corners? There were the social media elements to this. There was the language learning apps and how they play into the matrix and the industry. There was the gatherings and conferences and all those elements. And then there's the print media. These are the four. So for each of these, you have 6
Yeah.
levels. You have the remedial. You've remedied a certain thing. Subversive. You're subverting and with greater strength quite a bit of what is happening, disrupting. You're actually creating a break with the thought. Then you have the paradigm shift. You're actually reshifting thought in a different direction, abolishing where you're entirely removing that process of thought and having something else in its place. And then a revolutionary is the final stage. So this is the level of analytical rigor that we
Yes.
have at the end of the book, which is pretty awesome. Now,
And if I may add, I think the beauty of this system is that we're not telling our audience or our readers which way to go. We're not telling, once we have exposed the inadequacies of the polyglot industry and matrix, we're not saying, hey, we should abolish this completely, or we should only change this minor aspect. We're saying, if you believe our analysis warrants an entire overhaul of the polyglot industry matrix, then focus on the paradigm shifting, abolishing, and revolutionizing programmatic points. If you, on the other hand, believe that while the aspects we have pointed out are true, they do not warrant an entire overhaul of the polyglot industry matrix, then just focus on the remedial, subversive, and disruptive programmatic points.
absolutely right. Now, that is the penultimate chapter. We set out how this can work, and we give instances of each. We found clear, concrete examples of all of this. And then, like you said, the degree of which one believes things should change, one engages with these, advocates them, and sees these materialize. But then the final analysis is to look at our 2 initiatives. The first initiative, which you spearheaded, is the Hyperpolyglot Activist, THA as it's abbreviated. And the second initiative is HYPIA, the International Association of Hyperpolyglots, for which we are both a part, and it's a community, right? So let's begin first by talking about the Hyperpolyglot Activist. And you don't have to frame it as the book, because people should read it and get the details. But now, having written about it and experienced it and understood how far it has gotten and how far it might yet go, how do you feel about the Hyperpolyglot Activist?
Yeah, I think that both projects, the Hyperpolyglot Activist and HYPIA, play to our strengths and also to a certain extent expose our weaknesses. And so, and this is just goes to saying that creating is so much more difficult than criticizing, right? Tearing apart is
Yes.
much easier than building something. So when you build something, it's going to have flaws, but here we go. So the Hyperpolyglot Activist was created in 2020. And the idea was, again, to fill an identified gap in my lived experience and theoretical reflections between polyglossia, linguistics, and activism. And I think that the most relevant aspect which I have accomplished so far with the Hyperpolyglot Activist has been the successful identification and dismantling of the main linguistic ideologies of the polyglot matrix and a modicum of the functioning of the polyglot industry. And that in turn paved the way for Critical Polyglot Studies as a book. I think if I hadn't created the Hyperpolyglot Activist, I would have never devoted enough time to identify the polyglot matrix and begin to identify the polyglot industry. On the other hand, things that need to be improved are precisely what relates to the polyglot industry. So the functioning of the Hyperpolyglot Activist is tricky. I would not necessarily point out to all the flaws that I have identified, but I have confessed them in that chapter. So I prompt and urge the audience to delve into that in their own time. But yeah, I think the principal merit is the exposing of the linguistic ideologies that vehiculate the polygon matrix. Yeah.
Okay. I'll comment on HYPIA, but you can also comment on HYPIA. We're all equal in HYPIA. So HYPIA was founded on November 9th, 2016. It's the day Donald Trump was elected. It's the day I turned 30. And it is now a community that exceeds 400 people. It's going to be 500 soon enough. It has an administrative level. There's a president and there's directors. You are director of research. There's a director of recruitment, director of outreach, director of youth engagement, and there's a community. This community of people, they speak X number of language. Alert, languages is countable, that bias. They come from around the world. Alert, there is a disproportionate part from the quote developed world. There's an overrepresentation of Europe, North America, and then Latin America. There's an underrepresentation of Asia and Africa. But the purpose of this group is for us to encourage one another, to gain inspiration, to share and to learn from one another, and to offer resources as well as encouragement. So it's a lovey-dovey place. It's a very cool place, and everybody has different experiences of this. But when you look at it, once you have discovered the matrix, right? So I was red-pilled into this by you and by working on this book. But then I started to look at it quite differently, that actually, for example, to what degree do we use this native speakerism? To what degree do people use flagism? To what degree do they assume that they are more tolerant than average, or they really do, right? Or to what degree do they believe that they're exceptional? Well, partly it's that if you do speak 6, 7, 8, 9, you really are exceptional, that kind of thing. These all made me think hard about how far it's gone. And in the final analysis, we come to the discovery that insofar as there were two great forces exerted upon polyglossia over the last 30 years, there's the neocolonialism slash ethno-nationalism and then neoliberalism. Insofar as it has combated, effectively, it has combated neoliberalism because its very roots are anarchist. And that whole idea of starting from something new. And I happened not to be aware that there was a polyglot community or industry. And I started ex nihilo. That was part of the beauty of it. We managed to strike at neoliberalism. It doesn't exist. You don't pay money to be a part of it. You don't think along those lines. It's really a community. And those people who are deep in the matrix, the equivalents of Agent Smiths in the matrix, and the Matrix 1 Agent Smiths, they are totally hostile to it because they just don't get it, why it's happening. But those who want to be liberated, the numbers are growing. But there are limitations on the other side in terms of neocolonialism, because those are reflected in elements of the polyglot matrix. And to what degree can you extricate it? That is done in this chapter, where it's like, this we can address. It's a matter of education. It's a matter of awareness. But as you go down the list, there are a few things that you just could never change. For example, languages is countable. How are you going to deal with that? Like, how many would you need to join? So there are limitations to that. And so that is the exercise in humility. And it goes back to what you said in part 2 of this interview, where getting out of the matrix is not a pleasant experience. It is actually humbling. It's actually quite unpleasant. And I felt that, but it's fulfilling. And now it's our journey as a community to work towards the best we can, to grow and thrive in that manner. That's how I see how HYPIA is tackled in this. So if you have words on HYPIA, please go ahead.
Yes, I have words about HYPIA and then more of a general conclusion, a final minute if you would like. Words on HYPIA, I think obviously just praise, right? I think you've done a wonderful job. We didn't know each other before I sent you an email to partake in HYPIA cold email, right? And then you answered, and then we did the interview and the whole process, and here we are. So that's only to your credit. It means that it's concrete proof that HYPIA is open to everybody. Anybody who just sends an email, we don't need to know each other. We don't need to know who you are, what your gender is, what your country is. We're open to everybody, right? So if that doesn't prove it, nothing does. And I think the beauty of HYPIA is also something which I have realized in the last few years, is that it also exposes indirectly, not because it seeks to, but as a side effect, it exposes those that portray themselves as inclusive or tolerant as part of their branding within the polyglot industry. saying, oh yeah, I'm open to connect with everybody. I'm just passionate about language and want to connect with other people, right? That definition of the polyglot community. Well, if you're passionate about languages and you want to connect with other people and you can do it for free, then why don't you do it? Right? So it has also served for that. And I think I'm very optimistic and very bullish on HYPIA. I think it's just at the very beginning. We will look back on this conversation and we will realize within 5, 10 years, 20 years, how far we have gone with HYPIA. So it's all credit to you.
Inshallah.
I think you have found in HYPIA a way of implementing your genius in anarchism on something you're passionate about, and in this case, polyglossia. And so, congratulations.
Thank you. There's two questions. One is actually your final comments, but before that, now that you have a subdiscipline that has taken shape, this is quite an amazing thing that people give birth to a new subdiscipline. Disciplines don't come out often, but even a subdiscipline is a rare thing, and it has happened. It is alive, and this will be a guiding document for praxis, for HYPIA, for example. But it'll also be something for really creative, outgoing, a little off the beaten path type academics in linguistics, which I'm not a part of. I'm not the expert you are, but there'll be people like you who'll be into this. So what guidance or assistance do you want to give right now towards their efforts? What do you want to tell them, the people who are interested in you citing this work, thinking about what it says and taking this literature? So academically, what's the guidance?
I think that I want to make people aware of the fact that polyglotsia and languages do not exist in a vacuum, do not fall from the sky. They have a history, and that history needs to be understood if you want to learn languages meaningfully. We are in times of banality, but as Socrates said, the unexamined life is not worth living. So if you want to learn languages and have meaning and a purpose behind it, you need to adopt a critical polyglot studies perspective. Understand that polyglossia, as it works in 2024, it is mostly a white, middle-class, male-centered industry matrix by, of, and for that audience. And everyone else is playing zombie-glot, is playing attention, time, money, and energy into that system. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Do you want to remedy it? Do you want to abolish? How do you want to engage critically with that ensemble? And you can join your efforts with us. That's what I would like to inspire people to do. And you can participate in the dissemination of this work. You can participate in the Hyperpolyglot Activist, sharing your ideas. It's open to everybody in HYPIA. You can join for free. And you can help us create initiatives that can scale this subdiscipline, such as a conference, a journal, another YouTube channel, another Telegram group, whatever it is that you feel you can contribute once you have internalized that this is both possible and necessary, then we're here to help you.
Excellent. You said something before earlier that was very powerful. You said if the aliens come and they say, Senor Carlos, you are coming with us, and you can only leave one thing behind, it's this book. I want to also give one thing, and then I'll defer to you for your final words. This is the hardest project I've ever worked on. I've spent a lot of the last decade in a comfort zone, developing an expertise, testifying before authorities, publishing, relaxed, so confident, going on TV almost 100 times this year. Comfort zone. And for the first time, I stepped out of it. And I was totally, it's literally like the scene where Neo comes out, off the Matrix and he's really uncomfortable. It's that kind of feeling. And I want to thank you for that because it was the most difficult thing I have ever done working on this. And I was just like a sidekick. It was very, very hard for me. And my final comment in that regard is because you mentioned Kafka. This is an example of what Kafka meant when he talked about the doubly illuminated surface of things. I've experienced that now, thanks to your friendship, your support, the hard work that we both put in. He said, the truth is always an abyss front, right? One must as in a swimming pool, dare to dive from the quivering springboard of your banality, trivial everyday experience, and sink into those depths. Why? In order to later rise again. You're laughing and fighting for breath to the now doubly illuminated surface of things. And I get it, because this experience was like diving from the quivering springboard of what polyglossia is, going in and then bouncing back up. And I am laughing, but I am fighting for breath because I have seen the doubly illuminated surface of things. So over to you.
Thank you, Usman. So my final words are just an echo of yours in a way. I think that this has been a wild journey. This is a book that was necessary. I knew it was necessary, but I didn't know what the argument was going to be, which means that it was necessary. You know what I'm saying? Like sometimes you write a book and you already know what you're about to say, and it's just a matter of translating it onto the paper. This was not the case. Each chapter was challenging. Each chapter was nerve-wracking in the sense that it triggered the anxiety of not knowing what the way forward was and having to find that way, having to fight with those ideas and wrestle with them. But at the same time, that's what made it fascinating. That's what made it worth it, right? Knowing that we were creating a new path for the generations to come, and we're laying down basic fundamentals of critical polyglot studies. And yes, it has also been very important to me at a personal level because of my implication and involvement with all the sectors of the polyglot industry, including through the hyperpolyglot activist. And as Kafka said, you know, a book should hurt you more than the death of somebody you love. And I feel that this book has done that too. So it's a beautiful scar in a sense. It's not necessarily a trophy. And I hope that people who read will understand the extent to which I appreciate their contribution, and I'm also critical of their contribution. Yeah, so that's all I had to say, and thank you for making it possible, Usman. I said it the other way in private, I'll say it now in public. I think that without your commitment and your consistency, this would haven't been possible, and so it's all to your credit. And thank you for your hard work. And I look forward to continuing building on this initiative.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for those kind words. This is a moment of celebration for HYPIA. It is a moment of celebration for you and for me. And I hope that people get a glimpse of what we have done. It was really something superb, really extraordinary, and really demanding to produce this. But this will be a lasting document for the polyglot experience writ large. So with that, I thank you, Carlos. Thank you, everybody, for listening to all the parts or this part, and looking forward to everybody's feedback. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Usman. Thank you so much. And to everybody who's been watching all 4 videos. Thank you.